What if scientists have been hiding the greatest threat to humanity? I'm Ruth Leedy Carr, and for over 40 years, evidence has mounted of a coming polar shift, a secret buried in the words of Asimov and Sagan, and in the mysterious glowing poles of a hollow Mars.
Hello, folks. I'm Ruth Leedy Carr, author of Polar Hole Light in Europe's Clouds and Tipping Point for a Hollow Earth. If I told you I have 7 arguments in favor of the hollow Earth theory, a lot of listeners would roll their eyes and say to themselves that none of those arguments are important because the solid Earth theory is supported by scientists and the government, and there is photographic evidence for a solid Earth. Many of us assume the testimony of explorers also supports the solid Earth theory, but that is not always the case. Let's start with the photographic evidence. Photos can be altered. Painting over a polar hole with white paint would probably be pretty easy. Earth is often photographed from the side so that polar holes, if they were there, would not be visible. All we need to prove that planets can be hollow is a few photographs that show that to be the case. It is not necessary for us to analyze and criticize every photograph that seems to show a solid planet with no polar holes. Ever since the turn of the 20th century, there have been photographs of Mars that showed protruding blobs of polar illumination. George Gamow presented one of these in his book, A Planet Called Earth. His caption stated, quote, "The white spot at the top is the polar cap," unquote. At that time, in 1963, there was no proof that Mars possessed any water, much less a solid ice cap that appeared to extend well above the surface. There was some kind of excuse for the bulging appearance of the so-called polar cap, something to do with the effect of the Earth's atmosphere on its appearance. But this was all conjecture. NASA has in recent years detected wet rocks near a pole of Mars. It was announced on NPR. But nothing was said about detecting any ice cap. So the ice cap story remains unconfirmed. It doesn't matter how many scientists said it was true in the past. The proof has not been provided because there was none. An extraordinary Mars photograph can be found in Life Beyond the Earth by Samuel Moffett and Ellie A. Schnurr. A bulging blob of polar brightness can be seen at the top, and a smaller bulging blob can be seen at the bottom, slightly off-center. The caption makes no comment about this strange polar light show. I would say that if one polar cap were fully illuminated, as it appears, then the other should be in winter darkness. The real proof that Mars has polar holes, illuminated by an interior sun, comes in the Mariner 7 photographs of August 4th, 1969, of which I have collected 6 examples. The first example that I knew about was placed before me by my first husband, Michael Callanan, on one of our trips to a local library. This photo was from Patrick Moore's Guide to Mars, the 1978 edition. The South Polar Cap, or what was called a cap, was fully illuminated, while all the surrounding area was in darkness. The upper hemisphere was obviously receiving a lot more light, so that landmarks could be seen. If the northern hemisphere was experiencing summer brightness, which appeared to be the case, then there should have been winter darkness at the southern pole. The South Polar Cap should have been shaded, or at least partly in shadow. But in fact, the polar cap, or what was called a cap, was more solidly bright than any other part of the picture. This was odd because the sun does not appear directly overhead at the poles. It strikes at a low angle, and parts of each polar cap would sometimes receive no light at all. This bright polar cap on a dark hemisphere just didn't make sense. A very similar Mars photo, taken the same day, appears in Space Science and Astronomy, edited by Thornton and Lou Williams Page. After years of puzzling over these photos, I decided they had to have been altered to conceal the day-night border at the right edge of the so-called polar cap. If you saw that, you would realize at a glance that most of the so-called cap had to be on the night side, meaning its illumination can only be explained as coming from an inner sun shining through a polar hole. So that whole section of the day-night border had to be colored black, which explains why so much of the southern hemisphere looks unnaturally dark, even fairly close to the sun's bright reflection on the side. There is a small Mariner 7 photo of Mars in the Encyclopedia Britannica, 1974. The first time I saw it, I thought it looked like a painting. But it was taken August 4th, 1969, like the other two, and a few landmarks can be seen. They are barely visible because this is an artificially lightened print. The overall lightness allows the background sky to be painted a darker shade of black underneath the so-called polar cap to create the impression that that cap, and even the area to the left of it, is dimly illuminated by the sun. As a result of this sky darkening, the perimeter of the image appears to be visible for about 230 degrees. This, however, is impossible. An image of a planet or moon that is partially illuminated will have a visible perimeter that extends for 180 degrees, whether it is in the crescent phase or half phase or three-quarters phase. At full phase, the perimeter suddenly becomes visible all the way around for 360 degrees. There is no time when the perimeter can be visible for 200 or 230 or 300 degrees. This is common knowledge. So this picture is giving you positive proof that the true nature of Mars is being hidden through retouching. When the photo is enlarged, if the copy machine is sensitive enough, it is possible to see a patch of extra bright reflected light on the right edge above the equator. This helps to define where sunlight is coming from. You want that light coming in horizontally in order to understand this picture. So you turn the photo clockwise until that bright patch is halfway up. Then the lighted portion of the perimeter extends 180 degrees from the top of the image to the bottom, and the patch of reflected light is halfway along that 180 degree arc. You will now notice that the so-called polar cap now faces to the left, away from the sun's light. This proves that the cap is really a polar opening, illuminated from within the planet. This is obvious even though the day-night border at the right edge of the so-called polar cap has been covered over with gray paint. It may seem that all this retouching is intended to fool you into thinking Mars is solid with an ice cap on the day side. But there is so much retouching done, and it is quite obvious and even clumsy, and the planet looks so artificially pale and washed out, that it seems very likely that NASA wanted you to notice how the true nature of the planet was being artificially concealed. I think they were telling you in a picture what they were prevented from telling you in words. The cover-up must originate in the planetary interior, which of course is difficult to prove. I'm pretty sure that's the truth. In the November 1980 issue of Life magazine, there is a one-page story called Lifting the Veil of Venus. There is a large picture of a model of Venus designed to show how the planet would look without its cloud cover. At the top is a round basin with a flat bottom. This looks like the beginnings of a polar hole that has been covered up. The caption informs you that this polar area is, quote, terra incognita, out of range of Pioneer's radar, unquote. The question is, why would any portion of the planet be out of range? A polar orbit would allow images of the entire planet to be obtained. I can't imagine a NASA scientist saying, quote, we didn't care what the poles look like, unquote, or, quote, we weren't able to adjust the orbit of the Pioneer probe, unquote. They must have had Pioneer's path under control to to obtain the images that they did obtain. Why there should have been some barrier preventing them from gathering data on the poles is a mystery. Speculation has centered around a composite photo of the northern hemisphere of Earth, giving the illusion of daylight on all sides of the planet at once. The dark spot in the middle, with well-defined edges, looks to many people like a hole. The Danish explorer Edmund Borch reported in 1992 that he had been inspired by this photo from November 1968 to lead a team to the North Pole and find out whether there was a hole leading to the interior. On February 25, 1992, his trip was described in The Sun, a tabloid no longer being published. His announcement of finding a tropical paradise inside the Earth received no coverage from the mainstream media. This shows that not only was the picture inconclusive, but his trip, if it actually took place, did nothing to settle the question as to whether polar holes exist. If a central sun's light had been visible shining through the apparent hole, the picture would have been helpful evidence supporting the hollow Earth theory. We should note that if Borch's testimony is dismissed as unreliable, there's no proof that statements coming from government officials about the lack of polar holes should be automatically assumed to be reliable. These statements are, after all, based on observations by human beings. We don't know for a fact that any of these observations are honestly reported by the observers on the ground or by the officials who relay this information to the public. Government officials don't have a very good track record these days as far as telling the truth. So, instead of relying on silly arguments like, my explorers are telling the truth and your explorers are lying, we should rely more on scientific evidence. 1. The hollow Earth theory can explain why the magnetic poles never can coincide with the axis, although the two are always close together. The magnetic poles can't be located at the axis because there is no land at the axis. 2. The hollow Earth theory can explain why powerful earthquakes cause the entire planet to ring like a bell. That is because the planet is hollow like a bell. 3. The hollow Earth theory can explain how the solar wind performs the double function of powering rotation as well as defining and stabilizing the axis, while the solar wind's push at the magnetic poles is taking place. The auroral rings, that is the aurora borealis and the aurora australis, show us that the solar wind strikes in a circle surrounding the axis, and therefore this is the method by which this powerful force defines the axis. One point in the circle receives a stronger impact from the solar wind, and that point is the magnetic pole. Because of polar holes, the magnetic pole is always far enough from the axis so that the solar wind's push can drive rotation. Solar storms cause the solar wind's push to be harder at the time of the storm, and then the rotation rate jumps as a result. And this is reported by John Gribben and Stephen Plogman in their book, The Jupiter Effect. 4. NASA's discovery of a distant planet shaped like a collapsed football is consistent with the hollow planet theory. It is not consistent with the theory that all planets have to be solid. 5. Brilliant polar light on Mars, sometimes obviously on the night side, is consistent with the hollow planet theory and not well explained under the solid planet theory. 6. The spheroidal planetary nebula consists of a shell thinner at the equator orbiting a central star. When the solar system was evolving from a nebula, it would have been natural for the inner planets to begin as miniature planetary nebulae and simply retain that shape after solidifying. The outer gas giant planets don't have a high enough proportion of heavier elements to possess an orbiting shell. The solid Earth theory does not provide a convincing scenario as to why a bunch of elements got together to form a planet in the first place. 7. If a hollow planet's shell must be thinnest at the equator, like the shell of a spheroidal planetary nebula, this explains why the Sun's gravity causes an axis tilt by attracting the temperate regions more strongly than the bulging equatorial region. Many experts have said the Earth's magnetic field has been growing weaker for over 2,000 years, and this is leading up to a reversal of the field. The North Magnetic Pole will move to some new position in the southern hemisphere, and vice versa. Several experts have said a geomagnetic field reversal could happen in the near future. See the Scientific American article of December 1989 by Jeremy Bloxham and David Gubbins entitled The Evolution of the Earth's Magnetic Field. Also, in his book Cosmic Catastrophes, Garrett Verschuur predicted that a field reversal could begin 50 years from his book's publication date of 1978. On January 20, 2000, CBS News reported that the latitude of the Washington, D.C. area was greatly changed 80 million years ago as a result of a geomagnetic field reversal. Quote, "The Earth rolled," unquote, it was said. Dan rather expressed relief that we are not facing any such event today. But folks, we will be facing it soon. The new magnetic poles will become the targets of the solar wind, and a new axis will be defined by that powerful force. The polar holes will move due to centrifugal force so as to be located at the new axis. Senator Joseph Biden in 1992 forwarded a report of mine on prospects for a pole reversal to the U.S. Geological Survey. I was quoting ozone hole expert Susan Solomon, who said, "Earth may have some surprise for us rarely seen." Quote, "Will there be a catastrophe? We're not sure," unquote. I thought these remarks could apply to a coming geomagnetic field reversal, not just to an eruption. The agency's reply on July 1st assured Senator Biden that no major cataclysm due to a rapid magnetic polar shift in the near term was anticipated. This ambiguous statement failed to inform Senator Biden that a field reversal has been approaching for 2,500 years, as manifested by an increasingly rapid weakening of magnetic field strength. And some experts do anticipate a possible reversal in the near term, with the possibility that some species will be wiped out. Senator Biden saw no need to investigate this matter further, but he obviously didn't receive all the facts. Thank you all for listening. Perhaps these talks will continue. My website is at ruthleedycarr.com, and I am on Facebook. My books, Polar Hole Light in Europe's Clouds and Tipping Point for a Hollow Earth, are available on Amazon. Thanks to Explora Books for hosting me. And so long for now.